In this module, we'll talk about digital game technology. Our team members are Megan, Wanting, and Shazana. Here we have provided students with a matrix of the evolution of video game technology. This is a handout designed to provide students as a way to take notes on each decade or time period and each characteristic of video game technologies. So it'll be an easier way for students to take note of which decade relates to which characteristic they were talking about. Here's the outline of our module. First, we will talk about the history of game technology, and then we will talk about the evolution of video games. We will hit on hardware technology, software technology, output, input, environment, communication, distribution, and the business model. In the next few slides, we will talk about the history of digital games. In 1950, there were pre-digital games. In 1960, there were mainframe computer games. In 1970, was the birth of arcade and home gaming. In 1975, it was the rise of the arcade and personal computer. We will also talk about how digital games relate to technology, and vice versa. So we will talk about how technology drives digital games and how digital games drive technology. In the 1950s, it was during the pre-digital game era. During the 1950s, there were the first commercial computer systems. When academics designed simple games, simulations, and artificial intelligence programs as part of their computer science research. So there were three basic computers. Nimrod. Nimrod was a computer that was used to play a game, and similar with OXO and Tennis for Two, which were computer games, the earliest known computer games. In 1951, Nimrod was the first instance of a digital computer designed specifically to play a game. The Nimrod computer designed exclusively to play the game of Nim. It could play either the traditional or reverse form of the game. In 1952, OXO was the earliest known game to display visuals on a video monitor. It was basically tic-tac-toe. Each game was played against an artificially intelligent opponent. So as a user, you played against the computer in OXO. In 1958, Tennis for Two was another early digital game. It was the first electronic game to use a graphical display, as shown by the picture on the right. It uses an oscilloscope to display the path of a simulated ball on a tennis court. In this slide, we will talk about the mainframe computer games in 1960. So in 1960, there were the first time-sharing systems. So sharing a computing resource among many users by means of multi-programming and multitasking. It was the birth of the digital game Space War. During the 1960s, it was also the creation of imperative programming languages such as Fortran and BASIC. The game Space War was developed in 1962. It was credited as the first widely available and influential computer game. It is a two-player game where each player controls a starship and attempts to destroy the other player. It took 200 manpower to write the first version of Space War. In 1972, the Magnavox Odyssey was the first home video game console. It supported 27 games from 12 different game cards, games such as tennis and shooting gallery. It was also the first digital video game console. It predates the Atari Pong home consoles by 3 years. In 1972, Pong became the first successful arcade video game. It led to numerous Pong clones, which spawned the video game industry. The clones of Pong led to the video game crash of 1977. Next, we will go into the rise of the arcade games. During the rise of the arcade games, in 1978, Space Invaders became popular. It was the first blockbuster arcade video game. It started the golden age of arcade video games. Popular during the golden age of video games include Pac-Man in 1981, Donkey Kong also in 1981, Dragon Slayer, and Spy Hunter both in 1983. In 1981, arcade video game industry was worth $8 billion. During the personal computer era, in 1976, the Apple I was delivered as a kit computer. It was not pre-assembled, which made it less accessible. In 1977, mass-market ready-assembled computers allowed a wider range of people to use computers. These are some examples of mass-market ready-assembled computers, such as the PET. It was the first successful mass-market personal computer. Also includes Apple II and TRS-80. Next, we will look at the Mario franchise as the evolution of gaming technology. The Mario franchise provides a prime example of the evolution of games through the years. In this slide, we provide an overview of the Mario franchise. The Mario franchise consists of video games published and produced by Nintendo. It is the best-selling video game franchise of all time. The Mario franchise was developed over 200 games, including 12 series games such as Mario Kart, Super Mario, Mario Party, and so on. Next, we will look at the Mario franchise in terms of hardware technology. Next, we are looking at hardware technology, processing. In processing, Moore's law states that over the history of computing hardware, the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit doubles approximately every 2 years. So that means there's an increase in processing equals an increase in video game quality, such as graphics and the hardware and the software. Next, we're looking at storage of video game technologies. So in a gaming console, there is an integrated circuit, or the ROM, there's the cartridge for the games, the cassette or disc, CD-ROM, DVD, the network, and the cloud. These are all different forms of storage, from a hard physical storage to the cloud or a network, which is storage on servers. In this example, we show the timeline of the Mario Kart game and how the games are stored. In 1992, the game was developed and loaded onto a cartridge. So the Super Mario Kart for Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the SNES. And similar to the 1992 cartridge, in 2001, there was a cartridge for Game Boy Advance. In 2003, Mario Kart Double Dash for Nintendo GameCube was saved on a disc. So through these years, we see the evolution of the storage of video game technology. So in 2008 and so on, up to the contemporary era, the games are stored in the cloud. So Super Mario Kart was available for download on virtual consoles for the Wii and Nintendo 3DS. In the next few slides, we will look at software technology. In this slide, we're looking at low-level languages. Low-level language is a programming language that provides little or no abstraction from a computer's instruction set architecture. It is the binary computer code. It is the machine language, or machine code. It composes of assembly languages. In this slide, we take a look at high-level languages. A high-level language is a programming language with strong abstraction from the details of the computer, which means that these programming languages are human-readable. Some examples of high-level languages include BASIC, Pascal, Fortran, COBOL, C, C++, C#, Objective-C, Java, JavaScript, ActionScript, Python, and PHP. In this slide, we talk about game engines. A game engine is a software framework designed for the creation and development of video games. Video game developers use these to create games for video game consoles, mobile devices, and personal computers. Video game engines provide the graphics, physics, networking, input, and social API. On the left are some examples of video game engines and the authoring tools used to develop computer games. Next, we will talk about the evolution of games through the Mario franchise in terms of output or video game characteristics. This slide provides a timeline of the evolution of video game graphics from the 1980s to the present day. In the 1980s, the arcade game was the king of graphics, along with console games, which provided arcade games at home. In the next decade, in the 1990s, 3D accelerated video cards were developed, along with DirectX. In the 2000s, consoles and PC games focused on cinematic and realistic graphics. In the contemporary era, cinematic and realistic graphics were developed in mobile and web games, which provided stereoscopic 3D. This slide provides a chart of the evolution of Mario graphics from 1987 to 2012. You can see the development of Mario games from the NES console to the Nintendo 64 to the Wii, and so on. Each provides a different timeline of the evolution of Mario graphics. You can see how graphics has evolved through the decades. Next, we will look at the development of audio through the decades. In the 1980s, there was a focus on mono, which is single channel. So, synthesized sound was generating sound using electronic hardware or software from scratch. In the next decade, in the 1990s, stereo was two channels. So, stereo was the impression of sound heard from various directions. Stereo is digitally sampled sound, a sequence of discrete samples taken from a continuous sound. In the 2000s, sound was output through surround sound, stereo, which is stereophonic sound involving three or more speakers. It gave a complete auditory experience. For the next few slides, we will focus on input or video game controllers. This is a chart showing the evolution of video game controllers from the late 1970s to the future of video game controllers. From the late 1970s to the early 1980s, video game controllers focused on the joystick. In the mid-1980s, consoles were focused on game controllers, but PCs were focused on keyboard and mouse. In the late 1990s and mid-2000s, there were custom controllers and motion controllers, such as Guitar Hero, which provided a guitar as a controller and drum sets. In the mid-2000s, there were things such as touch controllers, which focused on motion and GPS, such as the iPad or using your phone. And there were also camera controllers with the Xbox 360 and the Kinect and those kinds of controllers, where it's focused on your movements rather than a physical controller. The future of video game controllers, it could include voice control, which is using your voice to control the video game. This is a chart which shows the evolution of Nintendo controllers from the NES in 1985 to the Wii U in 2012. So, through each decade, Nintendo controllers evolved. As you can see, they evolved from 1991, this SNES, 1996, which is the Nintendo 64, 2001, which is the GameCube, 2006, which is the Wii. All of these evolved from controllers, physical controllers, to controllers that sense your movements. In the next slide, we'll talk about the environment of video game consoles and the kind of environments that they are played in. In this slide, here is a chart for the environment for Nintendo consoles. We talk about environments such as the arcade, the home console, the personal computer, mobile, and the future. In the next three slides, we focus on communication, distribution, and the business model. This slide shows a chart of the ways that video games communicate and how we communicate with each other through gaming technology. In the early 1980s, SneakerNet was a transfer of electronic information through external hard drives. That developed into the phone modem, which in the mid 1980s became popular. So the phone modem converts signals produced by a computer to be compatible with a phone. In the mid 1990s, there was a focus on network connectivity. For example, the LAN party gives people with game consoles establish a local area network for multiplayer gaming. In the late 1990s to early 2000s, the client-server model became popular, so internet gaming and MMOGs were a popular mode of gaming technologies. In the mid-2000s, social computing dominated the landscape. Social computing shows the intersection in social behavior and computerized systems. This slide talks about the distribution of video games. In the late 70s and early 80s, distribution was through the arcade. The publisher and retailer became important in the next few decades, such as retail chain and direct distribution. Companies such as GameStop became popular for players to sell and buy video games. The internet and the web also became popular as game portals, so indie games were self-published on the web and players could buy them, so stores such as Steam became popular. Device stores such as the Apple App Store, the Android Marketplace, the XBLA WiiWare, PSN, and Steam became popular for players to buy games through the cloud and download games. Instead of having a physical copy of the game, they have a software like a copy of the software. And Facebook became popular, like Facebook games. Facebook games published and marketed to anyone who had a Facebook account. There are several different business models for video games, and each became popular through the decades with each new technology. The arcade was pay per play. Retail was pay per game, such as GameStop. Perennial retail got people to pay annually, so like it was a subscription service, or subscription service got people to pay monthly. Games such as World of Warcraft employ that system. Almost free games, which are less than 99 cents on app stores such as Flappy Bird, became really popular on mobile games. Free-to-play games, or freemium, is a pricing strategy by which a product or service is provided free of charge, but money is charged for functionality or virtual goods. Here are a couple of websites for additional readings if you're interested in digital game technology.